I'm Levada Gray. Welcome to my first video for Black Girl Math in 2021. As I said, exciting things are coming this year. And so I have Dr. Carolyn Strong, my longtime friend, educator, author, speaker. Dr. Strong's works primarily focuses on education equity and discipline disparities as they relate to Black girls. She's the author of Black Girl Blues and two children's books, The Dainty Little Gremlin and Microaggressions, A Cautionary Tale. I want to pause here and say hey to Carolyn.
Hey.
Thanks so much for joining me. I just with everything going on and just thinking about what will make 2021 different, what can we do to support educators, and more importantly, like Carolyn has been one of the main reasons I've survived these COVID times by checking in on me, figuring out like these Zoom meetups and conversations for our marathon calls, and also later thinking about safely distanced outings so that we could have some semblance of socialness and connection. And I had to have her for my first video for Black Girl Math about, as we think about social emotional learning in the mathematics classroom and how important it is to create space for Black children during these times. So thank you so much, Carolyn, for joining us, Dr. Strong, with your new title. Had to throw that in there.
Well,
Um,
I'm just glad you finally doing this. That's I'm gonna just say it. I'm gonna just put it out there. I'm so glad you
how long have you tried to get me on video?
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Actually, I want to, thinking about videos, the videos that we did at the end of last year that you did for your daughter's school. Can you tell us more about that, of like your project around how to support parents during these
Oh,
times?
absolutely. Um, it was my overarching consulting piece surrounding the culturally responsive and disciplined piece is called Strong Conversations. So that is the overarching, we're going to have these strong, overlooked, well beyond past due conversations surrounding equity, race, discipline disparities, the whole nine. However, what I found that we were missing during COVID um, was conversations that were not filled with a whole bunch of educational lexicon jargon that weren't made for parents. So what I wanted to do at my daughter's school was to create these 5-minute segments that were literally just to get you talking about whatever the topic was. So that those segments became known as Starting Strong. So the whole goal was to get these 5-minute snippets out to parents so that they would have some place to start, because sometimes all they need is a place to start. They're not educators. So for them to be at home trying to figure out how to fill this gap while they're trying to keep everybody alive, a roof over everybody's head, and folks fed during a global pandemic that was counterintuitive to all of that. So what I did is I developed these segments, and you were gracious enough to grant me some math tips, which I truly appreciate, because you know I don't number. Um but the whole point was to get something out to parents that was digestible. And it's not me sitting there going, okay, if you could turn your books to page blah blah blah, we're going to talk about metacognition and blah 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 and la 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 and all that stuff that irritates me about academia. So what I just wanted to do was just say, hey, look, life is hard, COVID is hard, let me help you out for a minute. um Particularly with the math, some of the things that we talked about. um that's the other thing, let me just backtrack a second. The other thing we that I didn't want to do in this series was to burden parents with yet something else to do. So it was like, you got to theoretically make dinner anyway. How can we incorporate math into this thing that you have to do anyway? And before the weather got bad, sometimes just the notion of a change of venue, of going outside with some sidewalk chalk and doing those things just to change it up a little bit, because so that students wouldn't become stagnant, because that's what was happening when they were staring at these screens all this time.
Mhm.
And the screen stuff didn't even start for a lot of kids until this year, like that whole March through May, when everybody just went home and they were like, I'll see you in 2 weeks, and then never came back.
Right, and we talked on that conversation about just even scavenger hunts, and that was something that
Mhm.
I was even seeing a lot of on Twitter. Just like you said, sidewalk art and how to move that into geometry, shapes, counting things in the neighborhood and in their communities. So yeah, so I heard that there was uh, positive feedback from your families around that
There was. One of the other things that we introduced in my house during that time, probably to my youngest child's detriment, was Uno, because you know Uno breaks up families. So we were trying to wait a little bit because she's only 5, but it's like, nah, homie, come get this Uno. So that was one of the things that we also did in terms of just trying to find different ways to engage with numbers.
Absolutely. And Uno definitely started early in my house. And we talked a lot about games in that conversation too,
Mhm.
that parents could do at home. So thinking about your starting strong conversations and the project that you were doing at your daughter's school, I wanted to extend that to also educators and also parents too of Black students around having these hard conversations about, I mean, just even what they were seeing this month with the attack on the Capitol, the changing of the ending of the Trump presidency into the new Biden, President Biden, Vice President Harris's reign, we'll say it, of just that shift in power. And because a lot of times we didn't have conversations, sitting around just around the hard stuff that we were seeing, again, depending on, your family setup. So, what can educators do in the classrooms, on video with students to have these hard conversations and really to check in? How do we create space?
I mean, you just said it. You check in. Um, and unpopular opinion, but you know I'm full of those. Um, any teacher that went into a classroom on January 7th after what happened at the Capitol and did not give those kids space to process did them a disservice.
Mm,
Um, because the world was watching. And I believe that it really impacted everybody, obviously, because of what we were watching. But at the same time, when you start talking about Black students and students of color, what you have is the juxtaposition to everything that we saw happening over the summer with protests, with people being tear gassed, with people being hosed, with folks being literally beaten by police, juxtaposed to what they saw there, with people being helped down the stairs and allowed to get on planes and go home in some cases.
mm, mhm.
So there was a lot to unpack. And even if the students didn't want to talk about it, and I know in some younger grades, okay, maybe you need to process that with your parents first. And I don't know how much information they've given you, but with kids that are old enough to take these things in for themselves, that space should have been granted, that space to process. Or just, even if you need a minute, take a minute. um I'm not saying you needed to devote your 50-minute class to that, but maybe, and I think we've talked about this before, I talk all the time, so I never know who I've said what to, but maybe we start class with some sort of writing assignment. Maybe we spend the first 15 minutes of this class with you just kind of processing and purging and taking this moment to organize your thoughts, before I just walk in and go, all right, pull your math book out.
Mhm.
Because that's not how life works. That's not how feelings work. That's not how brains work. And a lot of educators talk a lot about Maslow before Bloom, but we don't really practice it.
Yeah, and that's why I definitely wanted to have you to share, and you shared just one practice around just starting with a journal time or quiet time to process in the beginning. Because a lot of times I'll see that, pre-COVID, I would see it in morning meetings, before we get to class, but with, just the different schedules that students have, how do we do it not just at the beginning of the day, not just maybe right before your literacy time or your content area for older students, but also just in math class of like, how do you practice a check-in, like you said, being very intentional. What are some other practices you've used in your own school or you've seen in other places that work?
I think that depending upon what your school-wide initiative is, that there are a lot of schools that are moving toward circles, restorative circles, regardless of content area. I've observed some classrooms where they were having a discussion. I think it was a science class, and there was clearly a conflict going on. And the teacher was like, all right. And she stopped the class and she held a circle because she needed to know what was happening in her class that was creating this tension that you could clearly feel.
Mhm.
And that's not always something that you can teach through if you're trying to teach to the whole child. Again, it goes back to Maslow before Bloom, and we like to trot it out. We like to say it. We like to put it in our email signatures. But much like every other thing we like to tout and trot out and put in our email signatures, when the rubber meets the road, we are not practicing it
Mhm.
in action. And given the pandemic, given the social unrest, given all of that coming together to create 2020/2021, there is no way that you can teach a child and not be Maslow focused right now. You have to be more now than ever before because we are literally in unprecedented times. Like I in my lifetime, school's never been closed this long. Um,
Right.
People having to figure out new normals and school districts as a whole being forced to meet their own inequities in the face just in terms of even this whole online process. Like how are districts so inequitable where you have some school districts that already had this online platform set up and then you have other districts that were struggling to get devices for kids.
Mhm.
So these are all things that we need to take a look at. You have some students who have parents at home to help them because parents are working from home. You have other students whose parents are essential, whether they be medical professionals or whether they be grocery store workers or bus drivers. There may not be anybody at home to provide that assistance, and those are all things that we need to keep up front when we're talking about this and when we're thinking about what it is that students need.
Thanks. And so one of my last questions is, so if a teacher may not have had restorative justice professional learning or not familiar with that, where will we start if we wanted to start circles?
I think um going back to that example,
Mhm.
um before you start talking about RJ, before you start talking about circles, before you start talking about any of that, that teacher knew that class dynamic well enough to know something was off.
Mm.
So even if she hadn't been trained in circles, even if without any of that, she still was like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is not how my class is supposed to feel. This is not what my students do. So even if she hadn't pulled them in a circle, she could have still, we could start with y'all, what's wrong? This is not how you all normally behave in here. What happened?
Mhm.
Just those questions. I mean, I tell people all the time, especially as a dean and a disciplinarian, three little letters can change somebody's life. Why?
Mhm.
Because kids have become so used to the way things work. in terms of, well, you said I did it, that's just what it is, let's just move on from there, grant me my punishment so I can go on about my business. And you really take them aback when you look at it and you go, well, why? And they're like, wait, what? You want to know my side of the story? For real? Oh, well, let me tell you. And the same thing, I mean, why? What happened? Those are questions that kids don't really get asked. And so, again, circle training aside, just what happened? What's wrong? What's going on? Why are you feeling like this?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they can articulate it and sometimes they can't.
Right.
But at least gotta give them the opportunity to try.
Absolutely. And even like you said, even starting with how are you and really listening beyond like the, when you're interacting with someone in a business, they might say, how are you? And then not really.
And then you tell them that two of your dogs and your parakeet died, and they go, oh my God, that's so great. And keep talking.
Mm-hmm. That part. So how do we really check in? And like you said, what I also heard you say, what came up for me is building the relationship and continuing to develop that relationship. Like because you kept bringing up Maslow, the needs. And so the socialness, other needs that we need to make sure
the need to feel safe. I mean, at the bottom of that pyramid is physical safety. And and for Black kids right now, when you can log on to any social media platform and run the risk of seeing somebody's Black body being killed at the hands of law enforcement, that eradicates your sense of personal safety. And that is a big part of Maslow. Your shelter, your physiological needs. I mean, all of these are in jeopardy right now because of the social justice piece of this and because of the COVID piece of this. It's
a lot going on.
It's a lot going on. I am a whole adult and I'm sometimes finding myself struggling how to figure it out. So you can only imagine what's going on with little kids. Like I have a 5-year-old and every other day she's like, is Rona gone yet? Cause I'm tired of sitting in this house looking at you. No offense, but I need to see somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are all feeling that, especially going into almost a year of this, that importance of creating that space so students can share how they're feeling or, point to a picture, for the younger ones of how they're feeling and just pausing and stopping to do that and taking that time because it'll be well worth it.
Absolutely. And you even with the little ones, you would be surprised at what they can do. My 5-year-old wrote a book about just this, about how coronavirus separated her from her grandmother. And you know that book came out of the theme in her morning journaling. Every day when we would write and we would sit down and we would journal, it was okay, today is blah blah blah, this is the weather, but more importantly, this is another day that I don't get to see my grandma and it sucks. And that kept being the running theme. And that book, Pootie and Granny Don't Like the Rona, never would have come to pass had she not been given the opportunity to put those things on paper in the first place as just an outlet to kind of process what was happening to her.
So another example of how journaling just turned into this project for her. Where can, especially for teachers who like using books, may want to start off their conversations with literacy, where can we find your daughter's book?
Amazon. We did go ahead. I mean, once she finished the project, I was, I'm that mom. I'm like, well, it's done now. Let's go get it published. So it is published and it is available on Amazon. And it's funny that you mentioned that because we have gotten feedback from little kids that have sent her messages and just said in the way little kid speak, that's basically, you figured out a way to put what I feel in a book. You figured out a way to put how I feel on paper. And I think that sometimes, this whole notion, little kids are resilient. Yeah, but at what cost?
Right. And how do we let them like you said, how do we let them process and create that space like you were doing with Morning Journal, or just checking in for them to share, how is it going? It's, day what of not being able to see grandparents, not being able to see aunts and uncles.
Yeah. I think part of it, especially for like the little ones, we don't give them enough credit of and understanding. I think that when you start talking about the ones that are like 3, 4, 5, 6, a lot of people just go, "Oh, they really don't get it," or they truly don't understand what's going on, and it's like they may not understand the ins and outs. I mean, they may not be able to break down the science of SARS, CoV, whatever the designation of the actual disease is, but they know that their routine has been broken.
Mhm.
They know, I mean, little kids love routine, and
Right.
they know that that's not happening. They know, especially the ones who are close to grandparents, because when this thing first happened, they was like, it's getting to old people, and so everybody was like, ooh, no more meemaw for you for a minute. So that you haven't seen granny, meemaw, what, tt, what whoever, that those routines are broken, and those are things that need to be addressed. One of the things that we really have to stop doing with kids is this, especially us. We love to be like, they'll be all right.
Mm.
We love that phrase. They'll be all right. Yeah, they will. But do you just want to be all right? Or
And
do you?
how do we manage that? Because, like you said, my own feelings about not being able to see my nieces and nephews here, the ones that live in California, and or visiting friends that was so used to doing. Yeah, just how do we get that out versus like saying like just putting a label on it, and we'll get through it, we'll make it. And I'm like, what's been helping me, for example, like you said, journaling, an art, I have coloring books all over the place as well, so maybe it's a quiet moment. Meditation has definitely increased during this time, just to be able to and to feel those feelings, whatever they may be.
Absolutely. And I mean, the same, that part is for the parents too, because it's like, let's think about it. For the adults, while you over here spending this time with granny, I'm having a moment to myself.
Right. And there's a
So
lot of families and parents who have not had that moment.
yeah,
That
yeah. And we've got to take that into consideration too, because once you get into this movement in this space where you're just tired, you tend to take your eye off the ball and stop paying attention. And it's just like, you know what, you'll be all right. Just sit down over there. And the thing that I tell parents is that when you start feeling that way, if you need a minute, you need to find a way to take it. I did a starting strong video from my car with a brownie, because that was the 3 minutes that I could get. And I went and I got my brownie and I sat in the car and I ate it,
right.
because that was all the time that I could manage to get away from life. And sometimes you have to just take those moments where you can, just so that you as a parent don't get so burned out to the point that you just start taking it out on the kid,
Yeah. And
because
we
we
and
all trapped
extending
in
that.
this house together.
Right, and extending that to educators too, because some of them may be at home teaching while their children are also at home learning and in that space too. And so that's some great advice as well, for
Oh,
teachers and
definitely for
educators.
teachers.
Yeah.
Like, I went to the teacher store. I did a video on this too. I went to the teacher store early during the school year to try to get some things forever, to set up her little classroom situation. And the classroom, the teacher store was teeming with teachers trying to figure out how to make this thing work, because that was back in the fall when some schools were going back, some schools were not going back. So you had teachers in there, like, and some of them, when I stopped to talk to them, this was their second or third trip in there, because they're like, oh, okay, well, I bought this and it didn't quite go well online.
Mm.
So in terms of them seeing it on Zoom, so I came back to buy 20 more, and I'm just gonna drop them off at the students' houses so that they'll have them. I bought 20, and I'm gonna get them laminated. I'm gonna take them to the house, and just all of these above and beyond feats trying to figure this out. I mean,
Right.
there's no book for this. There's no handbook for this. The only thing that we have to go on are the pictures that we have from 1918 with the kids outside in the coats and the mittens doing school outside, because that's the only safe way to do school during the first pandemic.
Right. Right. And so, yeah, so our hearts, and also we just wanted to take this time to, our hearts are going out to our educators, our parents who are in this all together, and how, again, how do we do the check-in, and just starting with how are you, and then moving from there. So we really have appreciated, and I've definitely appreciated Dr. Strong for joining me for our conversation around what do we do, how do, how do we create space for our students.
Just, I mean, like I said, there's so many different types of journals you could do. You could do the interactive journal where they write and you respond. um I know a lot of people aren't trying to put that extraness on their plate, so no judgment if you like, I'm not doing that. Sometimes I would have students just write down all the bad things that happened to them, and I would pass the trash can around and let them ball them up and hurl them in the trash. Whatever, just something, even if you just want to do like a morning 5-minute writing, or the last 5 minutes of class as your exit slip. What's one good thing that happened to you today? What's one thing you think you wish you could change? Whatever. um it's
Yeah.
just
And one of the things that I just read this morning in a ASCD article, it was, I found on Twitter this morning, it was just the idea of being intentional about that time. So
Mhm.
whatever that time you want to make, in the beginning, in the middle, make the time. And so that there is that time for that processing that all students need, because we're in tough times and unprecedented times right now.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Dr. Strong, for joining Black Girl Math, for our very first, thank you so much, our very first video vlog, if you will. I'm learning the language as you are teaching me. So thank you all for joining us, and please share in comments how you're checking in with your students, how you're checking in with your families. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.